The Hope Chest, Chapter 13, Dead Horse Alley. Mr. Martin was wrong. There was not one hotel in Nashville that would take a white man and a colored child. Myrtle realized this a lot sooner than Mr. Martin did. She tried to tell him, but he just ignored, got more and more irritable, and wouldn't listen. They couldn't even find anywhere to eat lunch. At the first drugstore they went to and sat down at the lunch counter, the boy at the counter didn't even speak to them. He simply called the druggist in the back to telephone the police. Myrtle didn't have much trouble getting Mr. Martin out of there. At the next place, the boy behind the counter told them if they went around the alley door, he could serve them. Or, he added generously, Mr. Martin could eat at the lunch counter, and Myrtle could eat in the alley. Or I can take my business elsewhere, Mr. Martin snapped. Why don't you take it back up north, said the boy. If you don't want to respect our southern customs. After the fourth drugstore, Myrtle suggested that they eat in the alley because she was getting hungry. So that's what they did, sitting on stone steps behind a drugstore, beside an overflowing garbage can, eating egg salad sandwiches and sipping chocolate phosphates. At least prices are cheap in the South, Mr. Martin, who had paid 20 cents, said Mr. Martin, who had paid 20 cents for each of their lunches. I don't think I like it here, Myrtle repeated. Myrtle's people had lived in Washington ever since the Civil War. Washington wasn't exactly the South, her mother had always said, but it wasn't exactly the North either. Mama had sometimes talked about moving north. She would have been happy that Myrtle ended up in New York. But Myrtle didn't care for the Girls' Training Institute, and she knew Mama wouldn't have cared for it either. Mama had meant for Myrtle to get an education and do something in the world, something besides being somebody's maid. Mr. Martin seemed to get the point about the hotels quicker. Perhaps because of their experience at the Tulane. Most of the hotels probably didn't have room anyway, Myrtle thought, because the entire city seemed to be full of visitors wearing yellow and red roses. But the hotel with the doorman stopped them at the door, and those without, the desk clerk shook their head and said, They have to take us in at one of these places, Mr. Martin said as they crossed Capitol Hill and came down on the other side of the row of disreputable-looking hotels and rooming houses, which seemed to be leaning on each other for support. They went into one that said rooms 25 cents over the door. They walked into a gloomy lobby furnished with weak-backed chairs and grease-stained sofa that looked like it had fought in the Civil War and lost. Men who had seemed to be as much a part of the decor as the tobacco-stained carpet were slumped on the furniture, looking as if they had become one with it. The clerk at the desk sat behind a protected brass cage, in case any of the men in the lobby came to life and attacked Myrtle, supposed. He seemed less affronted than the clerks in the other hotels at the idea that he might have a room for Myrtle. Sorry, we don't take color here, he said. We try to run a nice hotel. Myrtle looked around at the men on the chairs, one of whom was swigging enthusiastically out of a brown bottle labeled Best Stomach Bitters. A cloud of cigarette smoke hovered between their heads and the ceiling. Cigarette butts were scattered around the men's feet. To tell the truth, sir, said the desk clerk, we don't allow ladies here anyways. Not even white ones. You can never tell with females, sir. And we do try to keep this place decent. I can see that, said Mr. Martin. Tell me, is it too much to hope that there's anywhere we can lodge in this great city of Nashville? Well, there's a woman down in Crappy Chute that takes in colored, said the desk clerk, thinking. No, come to think of it, I guess she was burned out in 1916 fire. Now, there's a colored YMCA downtown, but of course, they won't take the child. Or you either, come to think of it. Now, if you want to send her over to Hell's Half Acre. I'm not sending a 7-year-old girl to a place called Hell's Half Acre, Mr. Martin said. I'm 10, sir, Myrtle reminded him. Oh, that's just the same, the desk clerk shrugged. Smoky rolls just as bad. Here. He dipped his pen in ink and wrote a name and address on the piece of paper. This woman on Dead Horse Alley rents to colored people. Just head up on 6th Avenue, cross the Louisville and Nashville tracks, and then ask someone else for directions. Mr. Martin took the paper. Thanks. The desk clerk leaned forward against the brass bars of his cage. Listen, young man, he said, dropping his voice so that Myrtle had to strain to hear him. I know what it looks like to you Northerners, the way we do things in the South, our special customs. But we have a very harmonious relationship with the races down here. Very harmonious. Mr. Martin opened his mouth to answer this, but Myrtle grabbed his arm and led him quickly out the door. They walked up 6th Avenue, away from the Capitol. The street was cobbled with gray brick-shaped stones and had concrete sidewalks that sloped and slouched disconsolately into the street. 2-story brick buildings lined the street with wooden water towers raising up above them here and there. An advertisement painted on the side of the brick building showed 2 colored children of indeterminate sex, both wearing full skirts and nothing else. They had round white eyes and bright red lips. Between them was a sink full of soap suds, and they were both holding up freshly scrubbed dishes that shone like diamonds. Painted raids surrounding the dishes to show how much they were shining. More glowing dishes hung behind them. Beside one child was a box of gold dust cleansing powder. Underneath them were painted words, "Your servants, ma'am." The sign reminded Myrtle of the Girls' Training Institute, and she felt instantly depressed. "I don't want to ever be anybody's servant," she said. "I agree, Mr. Martin. Don't be." "Excuse me, sir." The colored man Mr. Martin called to looked surprised at being called sir. He touched his hat deferentially and gave Mr. Martin directions to the address the desk clerk had written down. Mr. Martin touched his own hat in return. Myrtle thought that the 2 men were making each other very uncomfortable. It got worse when they got to Dead Horse Alley. They had run out of brick houses and stone streets by then. There was a smell of outhouses and rotting food in the hot air. The foul water ran down a gutter at the side of the street. The houses were made of wood, mostly unpainted, or painted so long ago that you could no longer tell what color they were supposed to be. "I guess this must be Dead Horse Alley, Mr. Martin," said Mr. Martin. "According to those directions that fellow gave me." He sounded doubtful. Myrtle could see why. It didn't look like an alley. It looked like a dry gully cut by a rushing creek that would be back again the next time it rained. It wasn't even flat. There was no way you could have driven a wagon up it, even if it had been wide enough. A woman sitting on the stoop of what looked like a cowshed, sewing. "Yes, this is Dead Horse Alley," she said. "Can you tell us where we might find Miss Eugenia Reddy, ma'am?" Mr. Martin asked. "I'm Miss Eugenia Reddy," said the woman. She stood up. She was older than Mama would have been, Myrtle thought, but not really old. She wore an old-fashioned blue dress that came to her ankles, and had her hair done up on top of her head, but not straightened. Mama had never straightened her hair either. This woman was looking at both of them a little suspiciously. And she got more suspicious when Mr. Martin explained that they were looking for lodgings. The problem, it seemed, was that Mr. Martin wanted to stay there too. Mrs. Reddy was uncomfortable with that. She seemed to be thinking that if Mr. Martin wanted to stay in a place like Dead Horse Alley, he must be on the run from the law or something. Mr. Martin, evil-looking scar, probably encouraged her impression, which Myrtle had to admit was correct. She quoted a high price, $2 a week, but Mr. Martin accepted it without demurral, and she seemed to feel she had no choice but to let them inside. The house really had been a cowshed at one point. Myrtle was sure of it. A wooden floor had been put up, and the place was scrupulously clean, but it still smelled faintly of cows. The 2 partitioned-off bedrooms reminded Myrtle of stalls. One of them was clearly Mrs. Reddy's room. The other one, she supposed, Mr. Martin would get, and she'd have to be in the kitchen. The kitchen had a wooden cook stove, a dry sink, and a table covered with checkerboard oilcloth. A treadle sewing machine stood against the wall. There was a shelf with a Bible on it, and a wedding picture of Mrs. Reddy and some fella, who must have been Mr. Reddy. Next to it was a picture of a serious-looking young colored lady with round glasses. Next to that was a yellow rose stuck in a bottle. "The girl is my daughter, Rosalie. She's in preparatory classes for Fisk University. She aims to be a doctor. There's a colored medical school, Meharry, in Nashville," said Mrs. Reddy. The gentleman is my husband, Walter. He was killed in the Dutch Bend train derailment in 1918. I'm sorry, ma'am, said Myrtle. Mr. Martin looked like he was thinking of saying something Bolshevik about railroads, and thought better of it. Myrtle had learned on their travels that he thought railroads were all run by robbers and barons, who didn't care if their workers and passengers died. I'm sorry to hear it, ma'am. Does that yellow rose mean? Yes, I'm a suffragist, said Mrs. Reddy defiantly, and I support the Susan B. Anthony amendment. So do we, said Myrtle. Well, just stay out of sight, child, said Mrs. Reddy. That's our job this week, she sounded bitter. I can stay out of sight, ma'am, said Myrtle. I can turn invisible. Child, we can all do that, said Mrs. Reddy. Chloe had thought Violet's idea of being a spy was an excellent one. And you can report to me several times a day, she said. You can come down to the Tulane, or I'll come up to the Hermitage. No, that won't work, said Violet. Everyone knows the Tulane's a suff base. So I can't go in there with my red rose on, and I can't be seen talking to suffs at the Hermitage. They agreed to meet instead at Max Blumstein's pharmacy for lunch at noon each day, neither of them wearing suff or anti-symbols. Violet thought it sounded exciting to be and spy-like. Like something from the movies. Going back to the Hermitage was less exciting. The ninth floor of the Hermitage was somehow hotter than she remembered. When she turned the key and opened the door to room 907, she saw that the clothesline full of Nanking bloomers had been taken down, and the occupant was in possession of the room. Oh, said the woman, startled. I beg your pardon, said Violet. I'm Miss Violet Mayhew. They, gave me the other bed. Oh, the woman's mouth was shaped like an O, so maybe it was the easiest sound for her to make. She was stout, and not much taller than Violet, about 30 years old. She had brass-colored hair piled up under a spreading pink hat, and round, startled blue eyes. She was wearing a flouncy pink dress that Violet would have considered too babyish for herself. I'm Miss Anistet Escudrill, she said. I was just getting ready for the thing tonight. She nodded at the bedside table, and Violet saw the electric curling iron was now plugged in. How anyone could want more heat on a day like this, she couldn't imagine. Still, she might as well get right to spying. What thing? She asked, sitting down on her bed. I mean, I know there's a thing, but I forgot. Miss Escudrill untied the ribbons that held her hat and began unpinning her hair. I don't know, something at the Capitol. Miss Charlotte Rowe is going to speak. Have you met her? Yes, said Violet. I met her at the train station. She's so clever, said Miss Escudrill. And Miss Josephine Pearson will be there, and Senator Chandler. And, of course, Mrs. James S. Pickard. And some suffs, too, I suppose. Are you going to vote on the amendment? said Violet. I don't think so, said Miss Escudrill, opening the metal clamp on the hair curler, rolling a lock of brass-colored hair around it, and snapping the curler shut. I don't really understand all that part of it. It's just some sort of meeting. There'll be speeches. A dreadful smell of burned hair filled the room. Do you want to use this next? Miss Escudrill asked. No, thank you, said Violet, who could not imagine putting a hot metal next to her face in this heat. Besides, her hair wouldn't hold a curl anyway. She wondered if Miss Escudrill would mind if she turned the fan on. I just think we all need to look really nice, said Miss Escudrill, looking at Violet's plaid dress with the horrible patent leather belt. Because, you know, the Suffs are going to look like frumpy man-hatching witches. Violet felt moved to retort that at least the Suffs didn't wear flouncy pink dresses that are suited for a 4-year-old, but she remembered that she was supposed to be an anti, and kept her mouth shut. I was on duty at the telegraph office all morning, said Miss Escudrill. Every time a Suff goes in to send a message, I go look at the desk after she's sent it and see if I can read the impressions the pen has left on the blotter." She shrugged and reached for another strand of hair. "Then, whenever a messenger boy heads out with a telegram, I try to catch him before he gets on his bike to bribe him to show me the message. But I can't catch them," she shrugged. "They move too fast." "Would they really show you the telegrams for money?" Violet asked, surprised. "Supposed to," said Miss Escudero. "And then, if it's addressed to a Suff, you don't want them to get it. They're supposed to give you the telegram for money." Miss Escudero was either the stupidest adult alive Violet had ever met, or just didn't know what "supposed to" meant, Violet thought. "Don't you have another dress you could wear?" said Miss Escudero. Violet unwrapped her bundle and showed Miss Escudero the other dress that had been cut down for her in Washington. It was brown and black houndstooth, check, and looked as if it was meant to subdue whoever wore it into a deep and prolonged state of melancholy. "Huh," said Miss Escudero. "That won't do. Makes you look like a Suff, or a Bolshevik. I'll see if we can round up something better. I'm sure Mrs. Pickard can find something. Or buy it if she has to. We have plenty of money." "Why do we have plenty of money?" Violet asked. She had been wondering this since the meeting last night. "Because of the generosity of the true chivalry of Southern men," said Miss Escudero blithely. "They don't ever want women to have to vote. They know that Southern women were meant to be the queens of their households, so voting would be demeaning to us." Violet took this to mean that Miss Escudero didn't know where the money was coming from. "Miss Escudero, you're not even married," she said. "So how could you be the queen of the household?" To Violet's dismay, Miss Escudero's eyes filled up with tears. "What a horrible, cruel, nasty thing to say to a person!" She sat down on the bed, which creaked alarmingly, and buried her face into her hands, sobbing. Violet dived for the curling iron, which had fallen onto the rug. She missed the wooden handle and grabbed the business end instead, burning her fingers painfully, and she unplugged the curling iron from the wall socket. "I'm sorry, Miss Escudero," she apologized. "I beg your pardon." "Horrible! Not my fault. Not married," Miss Escudero sobbed. "I'm really, really sorry. I didn't mean it that way." "How would you like it? To get to be my age and not even be married?" Miss Escudero was getting more and more out of breath between sobs, and Violet wondered if she might be becoming hysterical. In books, when people got hysterical, you slapped them in the face. Violet didn't think she should do that. Instead, she sat back down on her bed and went on apologizing every time Miss Escudero stopped sobbing long enough to hear her. In between apologies, she sucked her burned fingers. She thought about the hatchet-faced woman in the train station in Chattanooga, waiting for her son's body to arrive from France. She was Southern, that woman, but she didn't look like a queen of anything. This spying was a lot less fun than Violet had thought it would be. She wished Myrtle were here.